and we're going to jump into the regional target webinar here in just a moment. But just want to start with some introductions on our end as well. And we'll say if you're not currently talking, if you will just mute your phone or your computer, and we'll have time for discussion where we'll open it back up. But if you would just go ahead and mute, that would keep the line clear for everybody so we can hear. So again, my name is Jenna Cullinane-Heggie, and I'm the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding. And I'll be kind of guiding us through the webinar for the next hour, but have some other colleagues in the room that I want to have them introduce themselves as well.
Hi, I'm David Gardner, the Deputy Commissioner for Academic Planning and Policy.
Oh, hi, this is Lee Hong Ma. I'm the point of contact person for Central Texas.
Hi, I'm Luis Martinez. I'm the data training specialist, and I met a few of you at our last data training session.
Great. So as we get started, I'll just start with some of the purposes and then turn it over to David for some kind of opening comments. But what we're hoping to do today is really to engage a diverse group of stakeholders. I know we have business and industry represented, institutions of higher education, K-12 folks who have been invited to come together to talk about 60x30TX and regional organization around achieving some of the goals and targets. We want to introduce the targets that are included, goals and targets included in this regional process, and the supports available to you. We want to talk about what the coordinating board is aiming to do and what we're going to be asking regions and stakeholders within them to help us do. And then we want to get input from you all about how to mobilize around regional targets in your area. We are doing these kickoff webinars for all of the regions and getting input about what makes the most sense within your context, geographically, with the players that are in your area. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. But I want to turn it over to David to extend an additional welcome.
Okay. Well, thank all of you for taking the time out in the middle of your week. I know how busy all of you are, but it's important that people like yourselves participate because we can't achieve our goals without your help. Some of you know historically we've recognized important differences between regions, and we know that what will work in one region may not necessarily work in another, so we've always believed in empowering creativity and insights throughout the state. So thank you for coming together for that. I'm going to give a very brief overview for 60x30, which is hard for me to do, but I'll do it. If you have questions later, please ask. But as you know, we have 4 goals. This whole plan is built on closing the gaps, but the first goal is a statewide goal in that it reflects the 25 to 34-year-old population of Texas. To achieve this, we really need the full force of Texas industry, government, higher ed, industry, everyone you can think of to achieve this. And this includes having a productive economy that keeps our students in state for the most part and lures others into the state, because this includes people who have our educational credentials that may have achieved them in another part of the country or the world. The second goal directly is your work in that we need to have at least 550,000 students graduate in 2030 with a certificate, an associate, baccalaureate, or a master's. This is critical, and we know that with industry sometimes we need to remind them that some of the credentials they're looking for are part of a college education, specifically certificates, and we have a wide range of targeted groups we have to work with, which I hope you're familiar with. But if we achieve this goal, we will have had more than 6 million additional graduates by 2030. The third goal is marketable skills. This is very challenging. Every student should expect to have marketable skills when they graduate with any of these credentials. We think many students have skills that they may not be aware of, but part of our role is not only to make sure we identify schools in all of our certificate and degree programs, but that we also help students know how to achieve those skills. If they may have achieved some of the marketable skills outside their major, they probably will, and in some other ways, but help them identify their skills and how to market themselves and look beyond a narrow range of jobs when they graduate. The fourth goal is student debt. It's important to note that generally about half our students have debt when they graduate. Nationally, if you listen to people talk in the media, you think everyone has debt, but we don't want those who have debt to exceed 60% of their first-year wages. That's important because based on staff analysis, this gives them the opportunity to save money for a down payment on a home if they want, to reasonably pay back their debt. And also, for me personally, we want people to be able to afford to do things that aren't as valued sometimes in society in terms of salaries, such as becoming nurses, teachers, social workers, a whole host of other things. So that's basically our 4 goals.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, so this is the backdrop of this work. What we want to do is talk about regional efforts and to help foster and mobilize regional efforts to work towards these goals. And so before we go any deeper into this process and what we're hoping to do and how we're going to roll it out, want to let folks know kind of who's on the call or who's been invited to participate. So when we talk about regions, often people have different regions in mind, but what we're using for this work is the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, the 10 regions that the coordinating board uses. And you can see on the slide here that we are displaying all of the public and independent institutions that fall in this Central Texas region. There are also a variety of other stakeholders in this geographic area. It includes 3 education service centers, part of Huntsville, Region 12, Waco, 13 in Austin, and also the Texas workforce development areas. 5 different workforce development areas are in this Central Texas region: Heart of Texas, Capital Area, Rural Capital, Brazos Valley, and Central Texas. So in terms of who was invited, presidents and liaisons from each of the higher education institutions were invited, as well as we talked to TEA and got a specific representative from each of the education service centers. They were invited, and the executive directors and chairs of the workforce development areas have also been invited. So who else is in Central Texas? This is certainly just a place to start. We know that folks that have been invited will play a key role in helping to achieve the goals of 60x30TX. But there may be other actors out there, such as active P16 councils, other collective impact organizations, county or city leaders, chambers of commerce, et cetera, that might be important to bring into this discussion. So want to let you know, we started with folks and we've given you kind of an initial contact list, but don't feel constrained in any way as we continue through this work to bring others who are important in your region to the table as well. So some of the, I want to dig into a little bit of data just to continue to provide some background for the plan. We're going to talk a little bit about some workforce indicators. And what you can see from this slide is looking at the number of jobs gained during the financial recovery after the Great Recession of 2008. You can see that the vast majority of these jobs that have been growing and kind of regained through this period require some sort of post-secondary credential. And while there is growth among high school or less, more of these jobs are coming through requiring an associate's degree or certificate or bachelor's or higher, as you can see here. This is region-specific data for Central Texas, looking at the jobs that are both high growth in terms of number of jobs and the percent of jobs. And what you can see here is that in the Central Texas area, there are registered nurses, elementary school teachers, other health-related jobs are either kind of high number of growth or high percentage growth. Also some kind of technology-based jobs, managers and others. Give you a sense of some of the demands that are specific to your region. I also want to share some wage information. This is information about 10-year post-high school graduation. So what we're looking at here are folks, high school students who graduated in 2006, and we track them out for 10 years. And when you look at the wage difference, you can see about $15,000 is the median wage for graduates or those who did not graduate from high school, up to $25,000 for those with a high school diploma. and then steady increases for certificate, associate, and a big jump at the bachelor's level. I offer this information. It may feel like preaching to the choir a little bit, that the value of higher education, and it's not only monetary, but actually kind of the economic return is a significant reason why students participate in higher education. And as I've been out in the field, I find that it's important not to skip over this part. It's not a given that everyone thinks more education is important or necessary, but I think when we look in the aggregate that students are better served in the long run when they achieve higher levels of education, and we want to support all students to have those kinds of economic and other social opportunities. So next I want to dig into an overview of the regional target strategy. So as David mentioned, there has been a lot of traction around 60x30TX. As we're out in the field, oh, we're getting a little bit of feedback, so if folks, I think we were, sorry, just a second, go ahead and mute someone with some background noise. Okay, so we've got a lot of traction around the plan as we've been through a legislative session, as we've been out in the field doing, you may have joined some previous regional workshops. There's a lot of support for 60x30TX. Folks are saying these are the right goals. We want to keep an eye on student debt. We want to be thinking about increasing completion and equity among student success in our institutions of higher education. But how the heck are we going to get there? These are very ambitious goals. We have a long way to go. And what's my contribution? These are some of the questions and concerns that we hear. So we have been doing some planning and strategizing around this, and part of what we're hoping to do is help provide some additional guidance about the contributions that we hope institutions and other stakeholders can make, and provide some suggestions about how to bring a diverse group of people together. We are very student-centered. This is a very student-centered plan, and we know that we need not just, the agency is not going to do this work alone. We need partnership from institutions of higher education, K-12, workforce, but also those intermediaries like philanthropic partners, community partners, researchers, and the like, and want this work to be kind of a forum for bringing people together. And as David pointed out, we know that there is a lot of regional difference, and there's a lot of differences among institutions within regions as well. But we know that within regions, while different from one another, there is quite a bit of commonality, and some of those areas of commonality are high school feeder patterns, for example. So even in Central Texas, which is home to our two flagship institutions, on average, so in every region, the majority of high school students stay in region, and the average is 80% statewide of students who graduate from high school go to higher education in the region where they attended high school. So certainly there are folks who move around, maybe even go out of state elsewhere, but when we're thinking about designing for the majority, we know that most students are staying kind of geographically close to home. We see the same phenomenon with transfer networks. Students are very mobile, but they tend to move around within institutions in a kind of consolidated geographic area. And we also know local labor markets differ regionally, but that the institutions closest to them are most closely tied to the needs and demands of that labor force. We also think that by approaching 60x30TX in a regional way, that we can help institutions in their own strategic planning and in their target setting by considering factors beyond their own institutional borders. So for example, if we want to increase completion or increase enrollment, but enrollment increases are coming from borrowing students or taking students from a neighboring institution as a region and as a state, we haven't raised all boats. So we want to be thinking a little bit more broadly about where our progress and growth is going to come from. We also hope that this work will encourage some of the tactical planning around how many certificates might we need, how many bachelor's degrees might we need, what are the connections and future demands of our workforce that we want to be planning for, what programs particularly need to grow to match kind of industry demand. So that's why we're thinking and planning in this regional way. So what's in the scope of the regional targets? There are three areas. David went over all four of the 60x30TX goals, and we've selected just a couple of areas to put in the purview of this regional target work. One, because we want to keep this manageable, but two, we want to identify the places where we really think the goal or target lends itself to regional work. So we've really identified three primary areas. The first is the 60 by 30 educated population goal, so that's what David talked about, the 25 to 34-year-olds with any sort of higher education credential in the state. So we're really thinking about all Texas residents here. So they could have been educated in any part of the state or any part of the world. As if they're a 25 to 34-year-old living in Texas, we would capture them and be counting them as part of this goal. The second is the overall completion goal. Again, David talked about this, the 550,000 certificates, associates, bachelor's, and master's degrees in 2030. And also, this is a target under the completion goal, which is that 65% of high school graduates would enroll in higher education the following fall. So we refer to this as direct enrollment. The 60 by 30 educated population goal and the 65% high school to higher education direct enrollment target, these really lend themselves to a regional focus. They don't really even work on an institutional basis. So if we're thinking about how educated is the Central Texas area, we wouldn't specifically say that's the responsibility of Central Texas College any more than Texas State or UT Austin. So it's really a collective of all of the institutions, as well as in this area, anywhere else, as well as the business environment and whether we're drawing in people who have higher levels of education. And likewise with the high school to higher education direct enrollment, we're thinking about all the high school grads coming out in a particular region, and it's the collective enrollment in higher education. Not any one institution in particular, we would say, is responsible for that. And then the completion goal, the second one here, we've included that in this process because that's the one we probably get the most questions about in terms of institutional planning and looking and seeking guidance. So now that I've talked about the three areas within the regional target process, there are two things that we're asking regions to do. So we are asking institutions and other stakeholders to come together to meet either virtually or in person to identify at least one powerful strategy in each of these three areas. So I'll talk a little bit more about what a strategy would look like, but some characteristics are something that's relevant to one of these three areas, that's large scale and high impact, that you think would meaningfully help move the needle to reach one of these goal areas. We are also asking institutions, so the strategies are at a regional level. The second piece is that we would actually be asking for numeric targets by institution just for the completion goal, that overall 550,000, and I'll be sharing the Central Texas numbers here in just a minute. Okay. The last thing I want to share before we take a quick break for questions is the timeline. So where are we right now? We started rolling this process out in a kind of a pilot phase with South Texas in the fall. And can let you know where we are with them, but they're organizing meetings at UTRGV, the Alamo colleges, and Texas A&M International to help move this work along. We've also provided some training to folks we call our data fellows, and I know there are some data fellows on the call today, but these are institutional representatives who came in to learn about the state data resources, about 60by30tx.com, the data that's available in our accountability system. But part of what we did when we brought them in for training is to spend some time focused on our regional data workbooks so that they would have some deeper understanding of the numbers behind these targets. And those folks will be available to you as kind of phone-a-friends for your region. And I'll introduce them in a little bit about who participated in that, so you'll know these are folks who have some expertise around our regional data. In January, and you'll see on our 60by30tx.com website, we have some resources available. We have a starter kit that's been released, and we're in the midst of these regional kickoff webinars. So now in the next couple of weeks, we'll hit all 10 regions. Coming up in March and April, we have our annual accountability meetings. If you've been involved in those before, you know that we've typically done them by sector, and while we'll still have some time by sector, we are organizing it so that at least half a day we'll have the two-year institutions and the universities overlapping so that we can have some additional regional discussion around data and some of the strategies that are leading to meaningful increases in institutional performance. Coming up in May, now that we've rolled this information out, we want to give people a couple of months to dig in, review the numbers, ask lots of questions, but by May we're hoping to have those preliminary regional target numbers become official. And these are not a lifetime number, but we do say that this is a living plan and something that we'll revisit every 5 years or so, but do want to have some consistency in planning for a period of time and would hope to gel those numbers. And then by August, we would like regions to be ready to submit those 3 strategies as well as their institutional target numbers. Okay, so let's pause there and we can open up the phone line, or you can feel free to use the chat so for discussion. What questions do you have at this point about the plan and the general approach? All right, not seeing anything. We're getting a few things in the chat about some logistical questions, but let me know. Feel free to use the chat box at any time if you have questions or thoughts, comments, reflections, and I'll just give you another moment or two if anyone would like to ask any questions at this point.
Yes, ma'am. This is Ken Cox with Killeen, Texas, just outside of Fort Hood. I'm here at Central Texas College today. I have 2 questions.
Yes.
The first, we have a large transitory population here associated with the military. And so even if their families are Texas residents, the parents could potentially PCS after they graduate from high school, and so they go elsewhere. And you already talked about you tend to go to school near where you live. And so they may go to college elsewhere, and then the parents later on come back. How do we capture that kind of data? That's kind of question number 1. And question number 2, under your completions, you're talking about certificates, associates, bachelors, masters. How do you prevent double counting as somebody works their way through the system between now and 2030?
Good question. So I'll start with the completions first. So completions are actually, we are happy to double count. We want to, if someone gets an associate's in 1 year and then 2 years later completes their bachelor's, that is a snapshot every year. So let's say they got an associate's in 2017, they count in 2017, we have a record of them. If they take 2 more years, 2019, they get that bachelor's degree, we count them again. So for completions, we want to recognize every credential that institutions of higher education in the region are conferring at that certificate, associate's, bachelor's, and master's levels. So that's not a problem. In terms of the 60 by 30, when you're talking about people moving around, this is 1 person for a whole period. So if someone earned an associate's and a bachelor's degree and they're 28 years old, they just get counted once as someone who has a certificate or above. We don't count each of the credentials separately for that 60 by 30 goal. In terms of moving around, what this information is collected by survey from the Census Bureau. It's the American Community Survey. So it's based on if you get a survey and you live in a particular house in a particular area and you get the survey, it's whoever lives there and responds to it. That's what we're basing this information off of. So it's a sample, and we use that information to draw conclusions about the regional and statewide population. So does that help answer some of those questions?
High school to college.
Oh, and then high school to college. So I'll get into this in a little bit more detail when I actually show you the targets. But we're looking at regions a little bit differently. So for the high school to college target, we're looking at all the students who graduate from high school in your region. And they could go anywhere in the state. If we can track them in the state, we would give you credit for saying they attended an institution of higher education somewhere else. But we're really thinking about the population and focused on where did they go to high school and how well did they do in terms of moving into higher education. Now, I can contrast that with how we're thinking about completion. When we're talking about completions, it doesn't matter where the student came from. If they're attending an institution of higher education in Central Texas, we count them if they complete a certificate, associate's, bachelor's, or master's. So we want to give full credit to institutions of higher education. They're out-of-state students. They're international students, students who are not 25 to 34. There's no age restriction on this. So we want to think across these goals, how do we help get a really solid picture from different angles of how well we're doing in terms of our higher education outcomes. Okay. Do you have estimated numbers regarding population increases and how that will impact regional targets? I sure do. So we're going to get to that. Thanks, Charles. We'll talk a little bit about absolutely population growth is baked into some of our estimates. Is there a date for the accountability meetings in March or April yet? No, those have not been finalized, but we'll be getting those out probably in the next week or two. So I'll get those to you. And then is the 550,000 target the cumulative total needed from today until the, no, so the 550,000 is actually the number in 2030. So we're at about 321,000 for the most recent year, our 2016 data. We're about to release our 2017 data, but 321,000 was the number that were conferred in our 2016 year. So it's each year, not a cumulative. So 550,000 in 2030.
And as I mentioned earlier, if we achieve the progress we want, the cumulative of all those years will be over 6 million graduates.
Okay. Is the goal to increase enrollment awards for high school graduates in the Central Texas region or for the colleges within that region, regardless of where they went to high school? So I'm not sure when this question came in, but just say that one more time. So we're actually looking at both. So for the, I'll just come back here. The third one, the 65% high school to higher education direct enrollment, that one we're looking at all the high school students who graduated from high school in Central Texas. But for number two, the completion goal of 550,000 certificates, associates, bachelor's, and master's, that is all the students who are enrolled in higher education in Central Texas. So a little bit different, but trying to look from both sides. Okay. Thanks for the great questions, either through the chat or on the phone. Your questions are very welcome and encouraged. So now I'm going to actually show you the preliminary regional target numbers for each of the three areas that I mentioned. The first is the 60 by 30 educated population goal. Again, 25 to 34-year-olds, anyone residing in your region. And what you see here is the 2015 most recent actual data that we have. So statewide, we're at 41%. And as most people well know, we are headed to that big 60% by 2030 with interim benchmarks at 48% and 54% in 2020 and 2025. And then in the table, you can see for each region, their 2015 most recent actual percent of their 25 to 34-year-olds with a certificate or degree, and our targets for 2020, 2025, and 2030. You can see for Central Texas, currently you're at 48%, and that is actually the highest in the state. The range is from about 29% to 48% in the most recent actual. And then moving forward, you'll see that the growth is anticipated to be in Central Texas up to 58%, 64%, and 70%. So some of you might be saying, hey, wait a second, I thought we were going to 60, and now all of a sudden you told us 70. So what we've done here is to take a look at the amount of growth we would need to see from each region to average that 60% statewide. And to be clear, in a lot of folks in places where it's less than 60% want to make absolutely clear that this is kind of minimum amount of growth. We would love to see every region stretch to 60%, but we also want to recognize that regions are starting in different places, and we are asking every institution to grow considerably over this period of time. We did actually cap Central Texas somewhat, so we are leaning on our regions that are above the average now, but also want to keep it somewhat reasonable. So what we've done is cap at no more than 10% of above the state, and then distributed that. So we are asking regions who are on the lower end to grow actually a little bit more even than what Central Texas is projected to grow at. Okay. The next is the completion, the set of completion targets. Again, similar setup here on the table. You'll see that statewide we're at 321,410 for our most recent actual and 2016 data, and aiming to reach 550,000 by 2030. For Central Texas, you're at 54,000 and change right now, and by 2030, aiming for close to 100,000 certificates, associates, bachelor's, and master's. When you look compared to other regions, you'll see that the other very populated regions of the state, like the Metroplex, Gulf Coast, and South Texas, have similar and large contributions to make, but important contributions across each region in the state. And finally, for the third area, the high school to higher education direct enrollment rate, we're looking at, again, high school grads from your region who come into higher education anywhere in Texas that we can track the following fall. You'll see that Central Texas is at 51%, and statewide we're at 52% in the most recent year, and aiming for increases to 57%, 60%, and 64% for Central Texas by 2030. And we'll pause again here. So what questions do the data raise for you? Any kind of comments or thoughts you want to raise? Okay. Not hearing anything. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but if you have anything you want to raise, please go ahead and put it in the chat box, and we'll keep moving. Actually, one thing I'll do quickly is head over to address the question that we got earlier. These are some supplemental data slides, which you'll find at the back. We'll share these slides afterwards. But this can give you a sense of where we are both statewide for the 60 by 30 educated population goal, where we include the migration scenario, where we're looking at the number of people, and let's just look statewide for a second for 2015. There are about 1.6 million people with some sort of certificate or higher in the state, divided by the 3.9 million 25 to 34-year-olds in the state, and that gives us a rate of 41%. So you can see similarly 251,000 folks with a certificate or higher in Central Texas out of about 527,000 people in that age range to get a rate of 47, 48%. And then you can see going forward, the blue shaded boxes, we get into the projections, the expected population growth, and the distribution of educated folks with a certificate or higher that we anticipate to get to those percentages over time. Okay. Okay, looks like we have a question coming in over there. Understand that each area, actually we go down, Louise, a little bit. Okay. Understand that each area is starting at a different point in 2015 and would need to grow even if we would meet the goal in a few years, was what it said about the minimum of 10%. Okay, so let me, what I'll just come back to here is you'll see that I'm at the 60 by 30 educated population goal. I think the question was about the 10% cap that I mentioned. So the 10% is, Central Texas is projected to be at 70%, while the state goal is 60%. So that is the 10% difference that I'm referring to. In some of our, if we asked every region to grow at exactly the same rate, Central Texas would actually be even higher. And we felt like that was getting to be kind of an unreasonable level to expect. And so we used that 10% cap to get to 70% and kind of distributed the other growth that we would need to other regions to account for that. So,
if you wanted to make a more aggressive target on your own, you're welcome to do that.
Right.
But this is an issue of being reasonable.
Yep. Yep. And this is, I would say, the art and the science of this. You know, I won't say 100% that it is science. There is absolutely, you know, the reasonableness check that we try to do on this work. Okay, and will the slides be posted on the website? So what we'll do, I'll show you in just a minute some of the resources we have available and where the recording will be, and we can also, we'll be sending via email the slides as well. Okay. So let's just jump into the resources here. So as you think about identifying 3 powerful strategies for your region and institutional completion targets, there are people here to support your work. One of them is me. So I'm going to be leading this process for all the regions, but we have identified staff people photoed here for each region. So you'll have a person to contact as you think about setting up follow-up meetings, as you think about looking at your regional data and digging in and asking questions. This is your phone a friend. So Li Hong on the far right is the point person for Central Texas. And then there are also the data fellows who I mentioned before. So we have good coverage across 2-year and 4-year institutions, and also a system representative here in the Central Texas region. So these are folks who, as I said, have already gotten some background information on the regional target process and also have some expertise in the regional data. The next resource I would point you to is if you're on your computers, either now or as a follow-up to this, I would encourage you to visit our website, 60x30TX.com, so www.60x30TX.com, which is kind of the home for everything related to 60x30TX. So if you haven't been there, there's great data available statewide, by institution, by region that you can dig into. But under the Resources tab is something called the Regional Target Starter Kit. Each of the regions have a place on here where there is first kind of advice for and action steps for moving forward. So it gives some background about what is this whole process about and how do I get started. There are several steps which I'll talk about going forward as suggestions. In just a minute I'll talk about that. There's also a set of sample regional strategies. So I know that when I'm starting something that's kind of new and nebulous, it's great to have an idea of some models to look at. So with everything in this starter kit, these are all suggested and in no way exhaustive. So you'll see about kind of 9 or 10 sample strategies along with some resources to give you a sense of what's the grain size, what kinds of things are we thinking about might be a regional strategy. One thing that you'll notice is there are examples related to guided pathways, helping to support students to identify program study within the first year, things related to transfer, things related to FAFSA completion. So things that you are likely doing and many people are doing. One question I've gotten as follow-up is, does this need to be something brand new that we aren't already doing? And I would say absolutely not. This is really an opportunity to think about the assets in your region, what strategies might be more powerfully connected to 60x30TX, more intentionally connected, done at a larger scale. Instead of 100 students, how do we have 100,000 students doing this kind of thing? So really want to encourage people to think big, but leverage the expertise and assets you have in your region. We do have a question coming in. Let's see. So our higher ed partners shared this meeting with me, but I'd love to be able to be added to the distribution list as well. Our chamber is very active. Yes, absolutely. So we are happy to add folks to this list. We will turn it over to you at some point. So this is something that you'll see is that we are really launching this work. We want to play a supporting role, but we will be asking stakeholders within the region to really pick up the torch and lead this work. So we are happy to be the best supporting actress and actresses, but we'll be looking for leaders to help step up, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about towards the end of this discussion. But yes, happy to add folks, anyone who you think is kind of important to include at this point. Other things in this starter kit are the regional context data workbook. So that data that I showed a minute ago related to 60x30 and some of the population projections and so forth, that kind of data is available at the regional level in that data workbook. Also, as you're thinking about completions, like going forward, if you want to be thinking about your Hispanic completion or your African American completion, which we hope you will be, although that's not formally part of this process, we certainly hope you have an eye on important student populations in your planning. You can see all of that breakout by institution, by demographics, and so forth in that regional target starter kit as well. So that will help you think about and plan for, from 2016, how do we get to that 2030 number. And finally, that suggested contact participant list. So we'll update that. That was kind of a point in time. And then you'll see the webinar recording and webinar materials will be available. So that screenshot is a little bit old, and so you'll see the information for Central Texas is also available. So going one step deeper into some of the advice for action steps, here are 5 steps that are in there. This is just one little piece of that starter kit about, what do we do when we get off the phone today? So, the first thing we suggest is joining this webinar or sharing the recording. So congratulations, everyone. We're doing step 1 now, and I hope that you'll share this information with key folks in your institutions or other organizations. The next step would be to organize a virtual or in-person convening, and we offer some advice about who should attend, and this is all locally determined, kind of a suggested timeline for meeting, considerations to think about for hosting, and who should facilitate. We've launched this work in South Texas is well on its way, as is the Metroplex. We had a kickoff and a subsequent planning call with them already, and so they're really into this kind of who should host and who should facilitate, and wanting to make sure that they have a neutral party to help bring everyone together and make sure all the voices are heard. Another element of this is setting the agenda. There is a sample agenda for a meeting in there. You could do one longer meeting or a couple of meetings, but that has been a very helpful resource in the other regions so far. They've been asking lots of questions about starting from there. I mean, feel free to cut and paste if you want, but also feel free to adapt or throw it out, whatever works for you. Then we're suggesting convening and sharing your progress, and have some advice about each of those areas. So that just gives you a sense of what's in that starter kit. So the next piece is just some 2 discussion questions. What I want to get to is that we have developed preliminary targets, which we've shared with you today, those 3 targets for the region as a whole. So how do you recommend operationalizing your strategy and institutional target work in your region? And want to open the phone line here, open the chat for you to give us some input about, geographically, organizationally, or by target. What are your recommendations for operationalizing some of these discussions around identifying strategies and institutional targets? So while you're thinking, I will just add that in South Texas, the webinar discussion led to, they said we're very large and geographically spread out, and South Texas is our largest geographical region. And they said, we've got our San Antonio area, we've got our lower Rio Grande Valley, and we've got this kind of middle section, and so they had 3 different institutions. Alamo volunteered to bring together San Antonio folks, UTRGV volunteered for lower Rio Grande Valley, and then that kind of Laredo to Corpus, Kingsville area, A&M International volunteered to host 3 kind of follow-up meetings, and the planning folks from each institution are going to work together to kind of keep some semblance of connection across those. Another example is I was just talking to the folks in the Metroplex, and they had a small group of volunteers. There are about 6 volunteers who said we'll be kind of an advisory planning committee group, and we'll kind of haul this off and in cooperation and with some support from us, think about how do we want to set up the meetings. And they're thinking about having a first meeting with everybody included, more of the kind of presidents and senior leadership, and then a couple of follow-ups where you would have other staff participate in some of more of the operational planning around some of this. So that's how they're thinking about it. I'm seeing, again, want to keep the phone open if anyone wants to chime in, if you have suggestions about what you think might be a good way to organize in Central Texas. In the meantime, I'm seeing something come in on the chat. Who is tasked with organizing the regional meetings? We have met regionally as community colleges as part of the Pathways Project for the Success Center. This could be a forum. So this is a challenge of this work, that there is not any one person or entity charged with this organization. We are asking you all to volunteer and participate to help bring something together. So Maybe it's an education service center, maybe it's a P16 council, maybe it's an institution. It could happen in a variety of ways, but we are looking for suggestions and volunteers. Regarding the Texas Success Center, we have heard actually in the Upper East region, they were saying the community colleges are getting together anyway for a regional event there. And they said, how about we piggyback? So that may be something you want to do. If there's another suggestion was the HERC groups, that there may be a HERC meeting coming up, and you might want to piggyback off of something where regional folks may already be gathering. Another question coming in, just for clarification, are we talking about the completion goals? So we are talking about all three areas. So let me move back over here. So we want folks to think about all three areas, 60 by 30 educated population goal, completion goal, and that 65% high school to higher ed direct enrollment rate. And so for all three of those areas, we are looking for one powerful strategy related to each of those areas. But in terms of numerical numbers, we are just looking for institutional numbers for the completion goal only. So it's both of those things. Okay. So I'm going to move to our next question. I'll come back to where we were here. So the next question is about, you know, taking the next step after this webinar. So we need a person or a small number of people to communicate with regarding these regional targets. And how would you suggest identifying those contacts? In some cases, we've had people volunteer right now. The other way we could do it is identify, you know, some next steps, have people email or let me know who wants to be kind of an advisory group or a planning group for this work. So are there any takers or suggestions at this point? This is a very quiet group. All of our others, I will say, have had some thoughts or suggestions to share. So if there are, again, you don't have to volunteer right now, but if you have an idea about who we might work with and through to get this going.
Okay, so for the Central Texas area, we suggest organizing by workforce areas.
Okay. And who is this?
Susan Kamas. I'm the Executive Director for Central Texas.
Okay.
Workforce. Central
Got
Texas.
It. Yep, okay.
So I think there are 4 or 5 in our area.
Yes, I think there are 5. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Susan.
That would be, is this Tamara? That would be easier to manage if, and the 5 areas can coordinate.
Uh-huh. Okay. Other reactions or suggestions? I have one, Charles Cook, happy to volunteer along with Willie Martinez to serve as a regional contact. Okay, great. Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Willie. Anyone else have suggestions about how to organize or people for this kind of planning? Okay, I see from Phil Rose, I'd be willing to serve as a regional contact from McLennan. Thank you, Phil.
So Linda Angel from Workforce Solutions Central Texas will be the point of contact for our Workforce Board area.
Okay, and Linda Angel, you said?
I did say that, Dr. Linda Angel.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Linda. Wonderful. All right. Well, what I would recommend from here, I would love to have at least one four-year institution involved. So either now or as a follow-up, and I'll get to some contact information in just a minute, I think it would be great to have some diversity and representation in this group. But for now, we've got Susan and Charles and Phil and Linda and Willie. We'll start there for a set of people who we can work with to plan some next steps. Question, do we need to look at sub-regions as well? The Austin area is very different from Waco, for example. Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's something I think maybe in this smaller planning group, I think to discuss that option of organizing by workforce area would get at some of that difference. I'm glad to be a contact for Region 6 and would love a recording as I was at CTAC Winter Conference. Be sure I'm on the board. Okay, and so that is Tally from Region 6. Okay, and Tally, if you would just be sure I have your Tally Joe, actually. Okay. All right, great. Okay, so what we're going to do from here is what's going to happen next in terms of next steps is what we'll do is send out the slides and the webinar recording as a follow-up to this within a couple of days to everyone who was on our invitee list. And then we'll also contact the volunteers who we've heard from so far, or any we get in follow-up, and probably organize a follow-up call to go ahead and kind of sort through some options and plan for a convening. So I do want to thank you so much for your time today. I want to thank you for, especially the volunteers, for your questions today, and I look forward to working with you. I appreciate the partnerships that we've had in the past, and what we will do going forward. I think we'll be able to do some tremendous things. I want to have our contact information here. You've got my email and also the email of Lee Hong, so be on the lookout for information from me or from Lee Hong. And just let you know, later here there's some additional data if you want to look in detail at some of your the information behind each of the 60x30 completion and high school to higher ed direct enrollment rate information that we shared today. So thank you again so much, and look forward to working with you.